What was the trial of Jesus like? That's what we're going to find out today in Mark 15. Mark moves quickly. We are now right there in the morning, and Jesus is brought to Pilate. The Romans got up early. The chief priests wanted to get this done. First order of the day, right away, before anything else. Jesus had been bound, probably abused, and maybe didn't even have a meal. So he's already going to come in here in a bad state. He's delivered to Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate being the Roman governor. So Herod, when Herod was a king, he ruled the whole area. Herod's sons are not worthy of being kings, so they got a governor. Governor's there to make sure that things stay in order. Pilate was married to the daughter, I believe, of the Roman emperor or the granddaughter, and so he probably had ambitions. He probably wanted to get out of this area. He wanted to do a good job and get promoted out of this area. And so Pilate asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, you said so. There are very few times in there where it is said that Jesus is the king of the Jews. And every time it was in a mocking way, or not in a, wow, you're the king of the Jews. It was thought that it was always said in such a way to be demeaning, I guess. And so then the chief priests begin accusing him of things. And Pilate goes to him more and says, are you going to respond to any of this? Look at these charges they're saying against you. Aren't you going to say anything? And Jesus remains silent. Now, I think the Romans and the Gentiles in general would have respected that. That you have to realize that Pilate was amazed at this. How many people got dragged before Pilate and begged for mercy, would confess to anything in order not to die, but not Jesus. He just stood there. We've seen where Jesus has refrained from answering people or doing miracles because it's not done in genuineness. And Pilate, he's not a pushover. He's not going to be swayed by the crowd. He's not going to be swayed by the Sanhedrin. You don't get to be governor if you are this kind of person. He gets there because he has done well in past jobs. And I don't know that Pilate saw the unfairness of this. I suspect he did. He saw that this group of people over here were heated and wanted to be done with Jesus. But the Romans were into process. This was a trial. The Romans slaughtered people, a lot of people, obviously. But they had trials. They had civic orders in place, and they didn't take it casually when someone was before them in trial. My sense of it is that, first of all, Pilate was trying to keep the peace. He did not want to revolt in Jerusalem during Passover time. I'm sure he wished that this happened a week or two later. He doesn't care about the Messiah. He doesn't care about this Jewish religion. He was a Roman elite, and that's all he cared about. So he, I think, in the end, wanted to do a good job, but also understood these people are heated. And they're not always the people who are right about everything. So then he tries to find a way out. And the tradition, according to historians, would say that each Passover he would release a prisoner. And so he saw through what the chief priests were trying to do. And so I think he wanted one more shot, because Jesus was not a guy who, even if he was claiming to be king of the Jews, he wasn't in a robe. He wasn't overthrowing Caesar. He didn't come down with an army. He came down as a humble man riding on a donkey. Then Pilate says, here's Barabbas, a murderer, an insurrectionist, and here's Jesus. Who do you want me to release? And there's a subtle point in Mark where, like I said, Jesus is called King of the Jews. It maybe seems to be a way of putting him down. I guess we don't know the hearts of those people. But in a sense, again, Mark always loves irony. He is big into irony. And so we know this is true. What he is saying here, even though you might be saying it not in the highest intentions, this is the true thing here because it's ironic. And it's a device that Mark uses, but it's also something that the Roman centurion at the end will also declare. Now, was it mocking, or was it the truth being spoken in the words, or was it the truth being spoken by the actual individual? We don't know. So the chief priests start riling up the crowd. They're in the midst of the crowd, riling it up. Barabbas, we want Barabbas to do. And So everyone starts screaming, Barabbas, Barabbas. Someone did, and I mentioned this last week, a really great YouTube video about the history of the world or the universe from the point of view of the devil. And the devil sees that God is going to cure the world of him and his influence there. And he prides it out there that if I could just get Jesus to the cross and to die in this horrible way, I can end this thing that God is trying to do, not knowing that this was exactly what God was trying to do. It was the devil in the crowd also encouraging people to also choose Barabbas? I think so. Then Pilate's like, well, what should I do with this man? And everyone yells, crucify him. What has he done? What evil has he done? And the crowd keeps shouting. And again, Pilate doesn't want a riot because a riot would be the sure way that, well, we see what happens in 70. The town gets cracked down on, people are slaughtered. It's the end of being governor of Judea because you don't have a place to be governor of anymore. And the thing that's important to understand is that if God had picked the Norwegians to be the chosen people, these would have been Vikings. If he chose Midwesterners, we'd be throwing corn cobs. It's not the Jewish people in particular who are doing it. It is because God chose these people to be the bearer of his word. And all through the centuries, they got farther and farther and farther away from the word. And now these are the very people who are yelling, crucify him. So it's not an ethnic thing. It is a human thing. And no matter who would have been the chosen people, this would have come to this point. So it's important to know. They say that the blood of Jesus will be on our hands. We would have cried out too. And are these the same people who were yelling, Hosanna, save us? They had the same problem that I think Judas had, where they thought that Jesus was going to be the King David king of armies. And now they see this man is just going to die pathetically before the Romans. And so they turned on him. Or are they just so much into doing what crowds do, which just start screaming, crucify him, crucify him. So Pilate released Barabbas. And the thing to keep in mind is Barabbas means bar is son, bar mitzvah is son, son's blessing, and Barabbas means son of the Father. And it's easy to sit there and think, how unfair this is. That's what I thought. I stayed in Jerusalem. I was at the Ecce Homo convent. That's where I stayed overnight because it was $2 a night and it was the only women's bathroom I could find in the old city. I always joke about that. But I walked the path of Christ every day I was in Jerusalem and saw these places and saw where this took place. And I just thought how cruel this was. You know, that this Barabbas guy gets let go when Jesus was clearly innocent of everything. And isn't that the case, though? We are clearly guilty of everything as human beings, and yet we're let go while Jesus takes our place and goes onto the cross and is crucified. Barabbas represents us all. We are the ones set free. We are the ones that are set free for the crimes we committed that Jesus never committed. So Jesus is mocked. The soldiers lead him to a place in the governor's palace, probably Herod's old palace. This would have been where Herod used to live, and now the Romans took it over and made it their piece. There's battalions around and different barracks around in this area. And some people said, well, this was probably in the barracks. It probably was in this place. The different places you go when you're in Jerusalem will tell you it was here or was there, but chances are this was all happening either inside of Herod's, like I said, old palace, which is now Pilate's headquarters, or it was happening in the barracks. They put on a purple robe and they twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. This is the ultimate humiliation. And it's interesting because thorns in the Bible, we see them, that the sins of the world are the thorny plants that grow around the seeds of God that prevent it from growing. I mean, we see thorns as being a representation of sin. And they all, again, now say, Hail, King of the Jews. And they strike him, spit him, and pretend to bow. And so they strip him. They put back his own clothes again. And the place I was staying was near this particular site. The nuns showed us these stones that they thought were in this area. And even though I was an atheist, just touching the wall where Jesus might have stood, looking at the floor where Jesus might have stood, standing there bleeding. I was overwhelmed by it, not because I believed it at this point, but I couldn't believe this inhumanity. And so it was something to see. Obviously, it was very touching to me. And the other part when you're in Jerusalem is that you will go down what is called Via Dolorosa, because a lot of the Catholic Church named these places and then put plaques up where all these places are. This is where this happened in the story of Jesus. This is where Jesus fell the first time. This is where Jesus fell the second time. And what's interesting, and like I said, I don't know offhand, but it's starting to look more and more convincing that the Shroud of Turin is the image in the shroud has someone who fell to his knees and bled. So then the soldiers forced a man named Simon of Cyrene, and that means that is in Africa. Cyrene is in Africa, to carry the cross because Jesus could no longer carry it. He is the father of Alexander and Rufus. We're going to hear about them later in Acts. But Simon is here, and Jesus is too weak to carry his cross. And so Simon helps out. There was a large Jewish community in this particular place in Africa, primarily because one of the tribes of Israel is believed to have gone there. So he was either of a Jewish descent or he was of African descent, and that was someone who traveled a long place to go to Passover. So they arrive at Golgotha, the place of the skull. Helena, the mother of Constantine, that was the first Christian emperor, later identified this site to be Golgotha. Catholics and Protestants have different places that they believe these things happened. One person believed that it couldn't have been at one of the locations. It's looking more and more likely that the place where Helen found was correct because it's more visible. It just had more passerby. The other place was just a bit too remote. I visited both places. These crucifixions are supposed to be a public warning. And so then they offer Jesus a mixture of myrrh and wine, and it was probably a painkiller. He refused this. He was going to suffer through every part of this. They divided his garments. You were crucified without clothes. And then they put the inscription on there, King of the Jews, letters INRI. And that, again, whether it was mocking, but we will see images, paintings, crosses that will say INRI, and it says King of the Jews. So the two robbers that are crucified on either side of him even mock Jesus. Priests, scribes, and everyone is mocking Jesus. If you can destroy the temple and rebuild it, why don't you just take yourself off the cross? Why aren't you saving yourself? And think of James and John. They wanted to be on his left and his right, but you know who's on his left and his right now? Two criminals being crucified. I wonder if that struck them. Then the 6th hour came, darkness covered the land, and that's not supposed to be a dark time. So then it's dark. Then the 9th hour, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this would have been in Aramaic, and the first words were Eloi, Eloi. El is always God, right? And oi, or I, would be my God. And so the people heard this, and they thought that he was screaming for Elijah. Well, let's see if Elijah comes down and gets him too. So this is a painful situation to watch. Mark emphasizes Pilate's reluctance to give in to the crowd, but he's playing politics. He's trying to keep order. He's not looking at this inner conflict. And now this mocking that is happening to Jesus is coming from all sides. He can save others. He can't save himself. He can resurrect other people. He's healed other people. So just to get the timing right, the 3rd hour is going to be 9 a.m. The 6th hour is going to be noon. That's when darkness came. And then the 9th hour is going to be 3 p.m. And that's when Jesus dies. Just to kind of see the timeline of it all. So then Jesus cries out, the curtain in the temple that separates the place that only the high priest could go, the place from the rest of the people, that tears down. There's no more barrier between us and God. We all have access to God directly. And then the centurion watching all of this says, truly this man is the Son of God. And people were saying this is the first person to say this was a Roman. Jesus, again, is not crying out other than the words that are recorded here. This is a horrible sight. This is a warning for everyone not to do it. It says the women were watching from a distance. Where were the men? Oh, that's right. They scattered because when the shepherd is struck, the sheep stray. But the women stayed. And then the Greek in this passage doesn't say Son of God. It's the Son of God. The Son of God, which means the Messiah. Not just like, oh, he's a child of God. He is the Son of God. And that's what this kind of faith. And again, we're writing to a Gentile audience. Evening comes, the Sabbath is approaching. Jesus has to get buried because if you don't get buried before Sabbath, you're left up there. Joseph of Arimathea, member of the Sanhedrin Council, goes to Pilate, asks for the body. And this took courage because are you one of them? Are you one of these criminals causing trouble in the town? But Jesus was probably part of the sham trial that just happened, but he stepped forward. Pilate is surprised that Jesus was dead already. Crucifixion was supposed to take days. It was supposed to, again, be a horrible sight, to be a warning, and then confirms it with the centurion, releases the body to Joseph, and then Jesus is wrapped in linen, placed in the tomb. This is Joseph's own tomb, cut for rock. This would have been his family tomb, and a massive stone is rolled in front of it. The women see where he's laid. So the women that were here were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the Younger, and Joses, and Salome. Salome, I believe, is the name of the mother of John and James, who said, can my son sit on your left and your right? I bet she thinks that differently now. Many other women came up to see this to Jerusalem. And at this point, it's Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who watched where this happened. And that ends chapter 15. What I'm going to meditate on is Joseph of Arimathea and his high position, being part of the Sanhedrin and seeing what the Sanhedrin just did, and his boldness to go to Pilate, a Roman governor, and ask for the body of Jesus. Not only is it a gift of generosity to put him in his tomb, because this had to happen quickly, but it's an act of bravery. And that is something that it's worth thinking about. And my prayer are for the apostles who ran, the Judas who betrayed, the women who stood there fearfully. This was going to be tremendous. We find out that the next day, everyone, I think, was freaked out in hiding. But God give us the boldness to stand up when we see evil happening. Help us to be strong, even when it's hard. And what I'll share with others is the fact that when Jesus died, the very first person that recognized him afterwards was a Roman. The very people who helped crucify him. The very people who had no history of the Old Testament to believe in God, but he saw right then and there who it was. I think, too, about the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Think about people who followed Christ their whole lives, faced persecution, all the apostles. But that robber on the cross, which we don't talk about in this particular gospel, asked Jesus to be in heaven with him. And he said, today you will be. He didn't have to do any of the things you do. I was someone who wasn't raised Christian, and yet I came along at the end and became a Christian. There are people who are going to beg for death on their deathbed, and they will be saved, along with the people who spent their whole life serving God. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. That's how wide God's grace is. Everybody who calls for him will be saved. The gospel's for everybody, no matter what you've done, and no matter how late the hour is. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you listening to this and watching this on YouTube. I hope that you're doing well. And if there's tools out there, if you'd like to get together and have live sessions and talk about the Bible, I'd love to do that. Please remember that you can always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I'd love to hear from you, or you can comment right here in the YouTube channel. I'd love to have active discussions about the Bible, what it means, and how it means for us. That's the thing about it. I want to talk about this story for regular people and the lessons we should be taking away from it. Thanks so much. Have a great day.